took me a while to actually understand why my pictures looked that way. I had a very long period of my career that I was trying to understand how do I provoke certain emotions. Why do people need to look at the picture, you know? I need to keep them looking at it as long as possible. That's my goal. Shadow, light, mystery. Photography, it's a mean for me to express my thoughts and ideas in something tangible. No one really knows what happens behind the camera. I mean, I wish I could know how my pictures are perceived by people. My name is Bassam Allam. I'm 35 years old. I've been doing photography for 13 years now.
Yes. Big ones.
I studied architecture. Yeah. I moved to Munich. I studied in the university there. I got into fashion photography by accident. Accidentally, I met a stylist who was doing a lot of fashion work for Madonna, Alexander McQueen, all of these people. He asked me if I wanted to do a fashion shoot. We shot the model, the stylist, and we were cramped in my living room. I got intrigued when I was challenged. I was just taking a picture every day for 2 years. And I think the easiest thing was to try the concepts on myself. I have hundreds of pictures that failed. I think that allowed me to actually experiment and be comfortable with my camera until I was able to communicate with an external person. I did like a lot of work that got published in magazines, commercial work, jewelry advertisement. I was kind of expanding in different areas of photography. It took me a while to actually understand why my pictures looked that way. Growing up in Cairo and just literally being surrounded by the maximalism of the city and just the fact that everything is happening at once. My photography is a result of where I grew up. When I moved to Germany, everyone was like, your work is very aero, it was very saturated. And in my eyes, it was not saturated. It was just how I saw things normally. And then there came a moment when I was like, I think it's very yellow. But then I understood why it's yellow, because things are yellow in Cairo, it is a fact. And then I guess the colors changed in my eyes, and then that was the influence of blue in my work. So I think there was a transition in my aesthetic, or the way I was seeing things. Kind of like shifted into less yellow and more blue. It just solidified a more neutral color. I cannot force my eyes to see things if I don't see them. I call myself a surrealist. I managed to experiment with a very broad spectrum of photography techniques that allowed me to apply these techniques when I'm actually shooting someone easier, you know. Try to access the subconscious in a way that would allow the ideas to flow to the outside, and that's what I try to channel in my shoots. I just like throw myself in this atmosphere and see how I can react with my surroundings to force the chance to happen so I can capture it. A chance would be just the natural way things would fall, you know, and the natural way things would fall would mean that this is the most believable picture that I can take. So I think while I'm shooting, I kind of like throw things and I see how they settle, and when they settle in a way that I like, that's the picture, you know. If you have an idea, you have to try it, and you have to try different techniques. My goal is to imply my surrealism and my personal work in the client work, you know. I think that would be the ultimate goal for me, to have the absolute creative freedom of translating my world into the commercial world. If you have a good picture, you can only make it great. And if you have a great picture, you can make it fantastic. That's how I see technology. If the picture is not already powerful, there's no amount of manipulation that could make it a powerful picture. With client work, I don't care if I'm shooting for the best brand. What is the best brand? You know, it's subjective. Everything is subjective. At the end of the day, I just want to achieve good pictures. Before even going on set, the whole preparation of the whole concept and the whole idea, I have to give my input about where I want things to go. I have a sketchbook and I have an idea book. I write down ideas that come to me, so I remember them. Ideas come when they want to come, that's the problem. Sometimes we feel completely uninspired. And sometimes we need to force a photo shoot to happen at a certain time, you know. So I think that the positive thing about an idea book is that whenever a client comes to me, I have an archive of my own ideas that I would revisit and re-inspire myself. I try to go to places that give me inspiration. So I would reread a book I find inspiring, you know. I'm trying to bombard myself with as much inspiration as possible. I try to at least do any. It's always there was a pigeon flying. There was a very bright white pigeon. Anyways, people we surround ourselves with and the places we spend our time in decide what kind of energy you have in your life, you know. And I think that's really just it, you know. An atmosphere is just a thing that I need to deal with. It's a factor that is there. So my brain is like, we can't change this. Doesn't matter, it's not even a thought. But the external factors would affect me in terms of, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to go there? What are the restrictions of doing this? It is a challenge which would eventually have an effect on the work itself.
Rolling?
Last year we did a special cover with Salma Boudef and Balmain for Vogue Arabia. That shoot was challenging and everything was very high paced. I traveled Tuesday, we shot on Wednesday, traveled back, had to give the selection on Friday, started working on the pictures on Saturday, gave the final product on Sunday. At the same time, the shoot itself had its own challenges. Some things were missing during the shoot, so we had to react in a certain way to make the shoot work. But that also allowed my experimentation to give us a strong picture. So the picture of Salma with the snakes on her head, that was actually a skirt. Legit. We couldn't combine it as a skirt. At moments like that, I need to find a solution. So I came up with the idea that we would put the skirt on her head, and then I would Photoshop combine multiple pictures of the skirt to make it look like a headpiece. I was only able to do that through the experimentation that I did in my early career. The harder the atmosphere, the better the solutions. And then the more interesting the picture would be, you know?
Both eyes, yeah?
Of course, the main goal is to make a product that is satisfactory to the client. But also at the same time, I try to push the limits of what I can achieve from that specific job. When you're doing something and there's not a lot of people doing it as well, you know, and even when you reach the point when you have your own style, I guess also convincing people that that style could sell. If you want to include that specific style with a specific brand that already has its own visual language, you need to kind of be so strong in your personality. You need to know that what you're doing can be applied to different things. If you don't really have someone present in the scene or someone that already did what you want to do, being in the early stages of that scene forming, there's a lot of work, you know. Constant convincing people that what you're doing is worth their time. At the beginning of your career, the most common mistake is fixated on their idea so much that they would want to impose it on someone. You have to include your subjects. I love showing people what I just shot for them to understand what I'm trying to do. The way I see it in my head is that I want to give a person an image that they would be happy for that photograph to be a representation of themselves. The believability of that person being in that situation or being in that moment is what makes the photograph powerful, you know. You can tell if a person is uncomfortable, and I think comfort comes from trying to create ease inside the moment, you know. The moment is not forced, the moment happens by itself. And if that moment just happens by itself, that means it's going to be truthful, you know. If you look at a picture and it gives you an emotion and it gives you a feeling, and you ask yourself questions that I was asking when I was taking the picture, you know. I guess the biggest challenge is explaining my work to different people. The visual language, I guess, is very specific. I have my own style. If it's someone that is still not familiar with my work, the challenge is to present the work and explain it to them. And that happens often with client work. People think just because this is how I'm communicating certain pictures that I'm not able to do other things. And for me, I see photography as a completely wide spectrum, and I see myself as able to do every part of it, because I started with taking pictures of flowers and landscapes, and then, you know, I had my surreal art phase, and then I went into fashion photography, and I'm still doing portraits. I think that's the interesting thing about photography, is that, you know, I don't limit myself to a specific genre or a specific way of taking pictures. Just always trying to get out of the picture and see it from a different perspective. And through that different perspective, it allows you to communicate a new way of seeing things. And now when I go back to Cairo, especially this time, that I'm trying to interact with the city in a different way. My main focus right now is that how do I see things differently? How can I take pictures outside of my comfortable way of creating images? Reframe my work in a way that would give it a new perspective.
مش عارف اجيبها لك ازاي، بس انا اروش حد يفجيلي لا محالة تلاقي الاروش، فمش مستني نصايح من حد وما تقوليش اعملها ازاي. كل ما اتكلم هتلاقي كتير بيلغوش علشان عارفين كلامي اطراش وحاجاتي مطروشة وستايلي اطرش وخد يوم.